Do you remember a time when leaving the house just meant disappearing? There was no GPS dot tracking you, no text me when you get there. There was just a quiet understanding that you'd be back before the streetlights came on. If you were born somewhere between 1977 and 1985, you grew up in a world that doesn't exist anymore. And then you became an adult in one that seemed to arrive overnight. You're not quite Gen X, shaped by that purely analog, latchkey kid independence, but you're definitely not a millennial, raised in the digital world of the internet. You came of age in the seam between two completely different eras, and for the longest time, there wasn't even a name for that. If you've spent your life feeling like you don't quite fit in any generational box, you're not an outsider. You're a Xennial, and we're about to explore why that in-between identity isn't a weakness, but your greatest hidden strength. The key to the Xennial paradox is a concept psychologists call a bicultural identity. It was first used to describe people who live between two cultures, like immigrants who have one set of rules at home and another out in the world. A massive review of over 80 studies found that instead of causing confusion, living in two worlds actually makes people more mentally flexible. Now, just apply that same logic to time. The world before the internet and the world after it didn't just have different gadgets, they ran on entirely different social and psychological software, and you are fluent in both. This isn't just a piece of trivia, it was a profound neurological event. Your brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for adaptability and learning complex skills, keeps developing until you're about 25. This is a window of high neuroplasticity, where your brain is basically a sponge, forming the connections that define your adult personality. For Xennials, that window was wide open at the exact moment the world went through a seismic technological shift. In 1995, only 14% of American adults were online. By 2005, that number jumped to 68%. This historic shift landed right in your late teens and early 20s. Your brain was old enough to have deeply learned the rules of the analog world: patience, physical presence, disconnected solitude, but still young and flexible enough to absorb the new digital systems without the resistance or anxiety many older Gen Xers felt. This created what we can call technological bilingualism. You learned the language of eye contact and shared silence, and then you learned the language of usernames and typed tone. Unlike digital natives, for you, the internet was a place you went to. You logged on, and just as importantly, you could log off. There was a hard boundary. This dual wiring means you can switch off your phone for an afternoon and be totally fine, but you can also pick up new software without a tutorial. You don't just remember two worlds. Your brain is structured to operate in both. The second pillar of the Xennial psyche is a very particular emotional state: cynical optimism. You're carrying a healthy dose of Gen X cynicism, but it's mixed with the early internet optimism of millennials. You remember when technology felt like it was going to connect us all and solve everything, but you've also lived long enough to see the deep cracks in that promise. This isn't just a mood, it's a worldview shaped by some very specific history. While your childhood may have been spared major national tragedies, your entry into adulthood was defined by them. Events like 9/11 and, crucially, the 2008 financial crisis hit just as you were supposed to be building a stable future. A huge portion of Xennials entered the job market between the late 90s and 2008, walking right into either the dot-com bust or a global financial meltdown. This created what some psychologists call economic hypervigilance. It's that low-grade hum of anxiety about money and stability that never quite shuts off, even after you've found success. You might find yourself compulsively checking your bank account or always waiting for the other shoe to drop because your formative years taught you that the floor could vanish at any moment. You learned the digital world moves fast, but the physical world is fragile.
That's the cynical part, a deep distrust in systems, born from experience. But it's balanced by an underlying optimism. You weren't so invested in the old system that the crash wiped you out completely, and you had a brief foothold in the before times, a memory of a functional economy that gave you just enough hope to keep going. This blend of hope from a stable childhood and realism from a chaotic adulthood created a pragmatic, resilient mindset. You hope for the best, but you've got a 5-point contingency plan for the worst. It's a guarded optimism, perfect for a volatile world. This brings us to the third, and maybe the most important psychological trait of the Xennial. You are anti-fragile. Coined by scholar Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the term describes things that don't just withstand stress, but actually get stronger from it. Resilience is bouncing back. Anti-fragility is using shocks to get better. Think about it. You learn to tolerate boredom in an analog childhood, building an inner life without constant stimulation. You learned how to just be, unentertained and unobserved. Then you were forced to adapt to a world of constant connection and dizzying change, navigating the friction between rotary phones and smartphones, from mixtapes to streaming algorithms, from card catalogs to search engines. That was a form of psychological stress that didn't break you. It made your mind incredibly adaptable.
There's another, more subtle layer to this: the privilege of a forgotten past. You are probably the last generation whose cringiest moments left no digital footprint. Every embarrassing thing you said at 17, every bad haircut, every questionable choice at 22, it all exists only in human memory. And as memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus showed, our memory is reconstructive. We reshape the past every time we recall it. Your past was allowed to fade, to evolve from an awkward reality into a story that you now control. Younger generations are growing up with a permanent, searchable record of their own development, creating a psychological pressure we don't fully understand yet. But you were given the safety of forgetting. This let you build an identity from the inside out, not one constantly measured against a digital ghost you created a decade ago. You don't just feel older, you feel a specific chronological fatigue from living through a complete civilizational shift and holding both worlds in your head at once. So if you've always felt like an outsider, it's not because you're a broken version of something else. It's because you're a complete version of something new. This in-between feeling isn't a bug, it's a feature. You are the natural translators of a fragmented world. At work, you're the bridge between the boss who wants a face-to-face meeting and the new hire who'd rather just use Slack. You get the value of being unreachable, but you're fluent in the tools of constant connection. You appreciate what we gained in the digital revolution, but more importantly, you vividly remember what we lost: patience, focus, and the ability to be truly alone with your thoughts. This dual consciousness, this technological bilingualism, this cynical optimism, this anti-fragile mind, this is not a weakness. It is a rare and vital skill set. You are not lost between two worlds. You are the bridge that connects them. The exhaustion you feel isn't just a sign of aging. It's the psychological signature of living through a phase transition in human history and holding on to both states. You aren't falling behind. You've just traveled a greater distance than most people realize. If this put words to that strange, quiet fatigue you've been carrying, share your own Xennial experience in the comments. What's one analog memory and one digital skill you hold at the same time? The Xennial story is more than just nostalgia for cassette tapes and dial-up. It's a case study in adaptation. In a world that keeps accelerating, where change is the only guarantee, the most valuable experience isn't knowing what's coming next,
It's the lived experience of having already navigated one massive, world-altering transition without losing yourself. That's not a paradox, that's a superpower.